All right, so I have now started the recording, and just one final reminder, we are recording this session. If you don't wish to appear on the recording, either on voice or on video, all that you need to do is make sure that your audio and video are disabled. If you interact in the chat, that will not appear on the recording. All right, so I am now going to, let me just end this. All right. I am going to now introduce Dr. Giordano. So give me just a moment here. I'm going to switch views. Here we go. So give me just a moment to pull up Dr. Giordano's biography. I appreciate your patience. All right. Be with you in just a moment. All right, so I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Alberto Giordano, who is a professor of geography at Texas State University. He is a founding member of the Holocaust Geographies Collaborative, a network of researchers and scholars interested in bringing geographical approaches, methods, and perspective to the study of the Holocaust and other genocides. So at this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Giordano. Dr. Giordano, go ahead and take it away.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you to the San Antonio Public Library, to Morgan and to Brooke for inviting me and for organizing the event. Thank you also to all of you for being here. I'm very happy to join, to have a discussion with you and show you what I've been working for the past several years. So let's start, and let me share the screen with you. I can. In just a second, here it is. So here is my presentation. So I'm going to basically show you what I've been working on, as I said, for the past several years. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them, as Morgan already said. So my name is Alberto Giordano. I'm a professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies. We recently changed our name at Texas State University. I'm originally from Italy. As you can probably tell, I do not have a Texas accent. But I've been here, quite a long time. And here is what I want to talk to you about. The first thing is, why geography? Why do we want to, what can geography, a geographic method approaches bring to the study of the Holocaust? That's the first thing I want to chat with you. Then I want to basically frame the Holocaust in the broadest context of genocide, and basically it presents a model for the stages of genocide that it's not my model, but it's one that will help us, start to think about the geography of the Holocaust. And then I have two examples. One is the geography of the Holocaust in Italy, and the other is the geography of the Holocaust in Budapest. Those are the two topics on the Holocaust that I've been concentrating most on in the past several years. I've also written about the Armenian genocide, so I have some knowledge of that genocide too. And then I want to basically look at the testimonies and the narratives of the survivors. My presentation is very much about methods and how you go about studying studying Holocaust from a geographical perspective. So that's my take on this, my perspective today. But I will try to make it as practical in a sense as possible. And then we will have a QA session at the end. First of all, why geography? And so here is my first part. And here is, if you want, here are two very famous Holocaust survivors, writers. And here you can see what they write, how much of geography there is. There is these issues of scale. You know, first we were living in our towns, we moved to another city, then the town shrank to the ghetto to a house, the house to a room, the room to a cattle car. This is the idea, in a sense, of geographical scale. I'll return on this to that in a moment. And here is Primo Levi, and he's talking about his experience in Auschwitz. And he's mentioning things that happen in Auschwitz that have a geographical component. So the northeast corner of the legion, of the camp. Activities that occur, you know, in the open, in a washroom, and as soon as the squads return from work, that talks about movement, you know, Auschwitz prisoners moving from a place to another, you know, being taken to the factories for work, etc., etc. So all of these as a component of geography, if you think about it. The Holocaust is usually studied mostly from an historical perspective, but there is a lot of geography also in the Holocaust. I want to very briefly mention this in case you're interested in the group of researchers that Morgan mentioned at the beginning. We started working together in 2007 at the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. We also work with the Shoah Foundation at the University of Southern California. We have received research funding from several organizations, I mean, the more academic side. And one thing that we have as a group is we are multidisciplinary, geographers, historians, art historians, and we involve both faculty and students in our work. We have a website, which unfortunately is not as updated as we would like, but it is there. And so just, you know, some of the projects I mentioned are part of the activities of this group. So let's start a moment by saying, what is genocide? You probably already know all of this, but one thing I wanted to mention, you know, I wanted to stress some aspects of what a genocide is. First is, for a genocide to occur, there must be an intent to destroy in whole or in part a group of humans. Could it be national, ethnical, racial, or religious? And then the UN definitions lists 5 examples, five activities that are genocidal. The killing of members of the group, or the serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. Deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. So, you know, for example, isolating groups that you're targeting in parts of the country that are not able to sustain their lives. So that's also another examples. And then there are things like imposing measures to prevent birth within a group or transferring children. This is the classical definition of genocide. Now, then I have 2 more that highlight some aspects. The first is genocides are usually conducted by a state. So you need the full force of the state to commit genocide at these, you know, according to this definition. And the second is one that it's very interesting and very relevant, of course, for the Holocaust. The groups that we are talking about in the United Nations definitions are defined. Who is a member of this group is defined by the perpetrator. And so, you probably are very aware of the extent in which the Nazis before the Holocaust went to, very detailed definition on who is a Jew, who is not a Jew, et cetera, et cetera. So it here points at the fact that it is the perpetrator that defines who is a member of the group. Now, then there are the 8 stages of genocide that I want to mention to you. The genocide does not occur in a vacuum. It is prepared. And, in the case of the Holocaust, of course, there is a long tradition in Europe of anti-Semitism. And it goes back to medieval times and even earlier. But of course, it took a certain, it took Germany in the 1930s and early 1940s. It took Hitler. It took a lot of conditions for the Holocaust to occur at that particular historical moment. Here, I just want to mention that the 8 stages of genocide, according to this model, what we call genocide, the legal definition, is only the 7th of these 8 stages, in which there is actually the physical extermination of people. But of course, it's preceded by a lot of by basically setting the stage for the extermination. So classification. An example is there is us and there is them. You start dividing your people in groups, one against the other, in a sense. Symbolization is it's an example. The yellow stars are an example of the symbolization. The swastikas are another example. They call Jews versus Germans, 2 categories of people that are distinct. The dehumanizations it's a very classic stage of genocide. You start dehumanizing your target by calling them cockroaches, for example, or gnats, or rats, or vermin. All all words used by the Nazis to prepare the Holocaust. Now, and then you need to organize the genocide. Genocide is not an individual act; it's an act of a group, usually most often guided by the state. And so you need to organize the genocide, and then it's a rapid slide towards extermination. So you polarize you basically incite violence of your group toward the group, in this case, toward Jews. And then in preparation is the idea, victims are forced to wear identifying victims, lists are made, victims are separated from the rest of the population. For example, during the Holocaust, they're put in ghettos. And then there is the stage of extermination that is what we know, the Holocaust, what we think about when we think about the Holocaust. And then one interesting thing, every genocide really comes with a phase of denial. And that could be, I just did what I was told to do. This never happened. Or you blame the victims, or you blame the contingency, the war, or you question the credibility of your witness and claims that were inadvertent due to famine, migration, disease, or as in the Armenian genocide, all of these plus, the war, World War I. And so these, set the stage in what I want to talk to you about. And here is why geography. And here is we listen to the testimonies of the victims. Here is the perpetrator talking. And one of the characteristics of genocide, and that's, from a geographical part is that extremely effective genocides are different in different regions and countries. Your large-scale genocide like the Holocaust. In the case of the Holocaust, the Nazis adopted a very sophisticated approach. They changed over the course of the war and in different parts of Europe. So, for example, ghettos were only in Eastern Europe. There were no ghettos in Western Europe. And the things like camps like Auschwitz or extermination camps like Treblinka, etc., were the second stage of the Holocaust. The Nazis experimented with other things before they created camps. And you know, what I wanna, so if you think about these, the scales at different places. What we work with as a group, we went from the camp system, continental Europe, to study example from Eastern Europe early in the war, the Einsatzgruppe. Then we looked at Italy as an example of a national, Budapest as a city, Auschwitz as a camp, and that marches as an example of basically narratives of the victims who were moved at the end of the war from the camps that were being liberated by the Soviets west to Germany or you know, west. The Nazis were still, and these are very late, like in 1945, where Nazis were still thinking they were perhaps winning the war, or they still had plans for Jews, that so they evacuated them west. Now, the Holocaust in Italy, I want to talk about from a national scale. And Morgan, can you please tell me what time is it? I don't have my.
Yeah, no worries, Dr. Giordano. It is 2:27, so we're about.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to start with Italy. And here is, you know, a little bit about Italy. Italy has a small population of a small Jewish population, about 60,000. Very urban, concentrated in northern and central Italy, secular and integrated, and with very frequent interfaith marriages. So it was spoke Italian, participated in the political life of Italy. Very different classes. You know, there were some very wealthy Jews, but there were a very vast Jewish working class, especially in Rome. Rome had a Jewish community for over a constant Jewish presence in Rome for at least 2,500 years. And so that's the situation. Now, the arrest and deportation in Italy started in September 1943 and lasted throughout 1944. So the Italian fascist regime resisted the Nazi Germany request to deport Jews, and only when the collapse of fascism basically in the summer of 1943, the Germans took over, and they, with help from a lot of Italian perpetrators, they implemented the Holocaust in Italy. Now, what I've done here with some students, and you know, we've written about this, is we basically looked sorry, a secondary source. It's a list of all of the people that were deported from Italy, or from a part of Europe that were at that time Italy. I'm thinking about the islands that now are part of Greece. Now, this is an excellent source and includes a lot of information about these victims, one of whom you see there in the picture. And as you can tell, sorry, a lot of these, you know, a lot of these information is geographical. And so we work on all of these aspects, but here what I want to show you is the historical geographic information system that we created, which is basically a map of where this happened and a map that can be analyzed in way I will see you. So here is a very good, I mean, a very comprehensive view of the Holocaust in Italy. So in the black dots are places in which Jewish Jews were arrested, and then the yellow squares is where they were concentrated in Italy before being sent to camps outside of Italy, especially to Auschwitz. Those who were sent to the camps, the vast majority of them did not come back, especially those who were sent to Auschwitz. So that's an image of the Holocaust in it. That's a simple map. Now, to show you what you can do with geography, just very simple, another very simple map. This is notice that there was nobody in southern Italy because at this point, in September 1943, southern Italy had already been liberated. And so it was only here, only in certain and northern Italy. Now, here you can look the number of arrests in different places, in different cities. One thing you can notice is that, this corresponds more or less with the location of the Jewish population before the war. One thing you can do with this analysis is look for more regional patterns. So the ellipses, the light blue ellipses give you, in a sense, areas of particular high concentration. And there is a lot going on here, but I want to point, in line with what is the topic of, the refugees. A lot of, just a brief comment, a lot of Jews were arrested while trying to escape to Switzerland. Switzerland had a policy at this time in which they did not really want to admit any more Jews. They already had a population coming from other countries. And so a lot of these people here, the people who you see here were arrested while trying to escape to Switzerland. So that's one of the things I want. So that's what I wanted to, really very briefly talk to you about here. Now, about Italy. In Budapest, it's a very, very different case. It's a city. The Budapest ghetto was a dispersed ghetto, was not what you have in mind when you think about ghetto in terms of, the Warsaw ghetto with walls, etc. It was a dispersed ghetto. I'll show you an example. It's a much bigger Jewish population, and it's a primary source. We built these data set from primary sources that are in Hungary. And here you can see, this is a very skeleton map of Budapest, but this is the things that I wanted to mention, this is what I was talking about in terms of dispersed ghetto. Rather than taking the Jewish population and put it into a ghetto like in Warsaw, what the Nazis implemented here at this time was the opposite. They bring the ghetto to the Jews. So Jewish families were forced to move to small apartments, very crowded apartments, and that's what you are seeing here. Also in Budapest, there was different configuration of the ghetto, and here you can see the dates. So there were certain buildings and apartments that were first designated, that were taken off the list, etc. And so that's what is reflected here. Now, here, geography can show you, what you can do with a GIS, with the Geographic Information System, is starting to, study from a geographical point of view, things like walking distances. Okay, so here is basically Jews were only able to use certain hospitals that were designated for them. And it was very important to be able to live near one. And so in order to receive some care. And so the invisible walls refer to the idea that if you live here, then you have very big difficulties reaching, either other Jews or places that you needed to go to, like hospitals or market halls or other public places. And so here is basically, you can see that even though there was no physical walls, there were what we call the invisible walls, in which, they're basically created by geography. Now, Jews at this point could not walk, could not use public transportation, could only walk. Here is the similar idea. Okay, it's I'll come back to this because I have other things I want to show you. But here is basically the same idea with market halls with a different configuration, a different mapping. I'm bringing this here because if you want, if you're interested, we have a YouTube video that basically that I create with some other people and talks about what I just showed you. If you look at YouTube and you basically search mapping mobility in the Budapest ghetto, you will find it. And it starts like this. I don't want to go through all of it, but it's basically go through how we created this mapping, animated mapping. Now, oops, let me move on. Now, this, in a sense, is what geography can show you when you look at the policies that the perpetrator implements. It is the perpetrator who, build the ghettos, deports the Jewish population, etc., etc. Now, in this second part, I basically want to return to the survivors, that we saw at the very beginning. And here, just a few examples, and in words and images. So one thing, so when you study narratives and testimonies, you can approach the issue from 2 points of view. One is what is called close reading, in which you look very closely at all of the, the testimonies of one person, and you try to recreate the entire path and of this person, and that's called close reading. But then, the Holocaust, there's a lot of big archives about Holocaust survivor narratives. And so, like, the Holocaust Museum has them, the Shoah Foundation at the University of California, Southern California has it. And so here is, how do you study big data sets, a large number of testimonies? That is what is called distant reading. So I want to give you just an example of close readings. And this is a Holocaust survivor from Italy, Gilberto Salmoni. And here is his story. He was from Genoa. He was trying with his family. It was like a 13-year-old boy at this time. They were trying to reach Switzerland. They were arrested, moved around Italy, and then 3 members of the family, mother, father, and the daughter, were sent to Auschwitz, but were killed immediately. And the 2 brothers were sent to Buchenwald. And here is Gilberto. Here he was actually 17 at this time. So here is a mapping, and you can look at the speciality, the geography. You can look at trajectories, map trajectory, etc., etc. Here is, so Gilberto Salmoni is a survivor. And here is, he was interviewed by the Shoah Foundation. And here I just have, the member of his family, how many times he mentioned them, and who are they, how they are related to them, etc., etc. So there is a lot part of this that I can, tell you more about if you want, but here is just the basic structure of his family. But then I was particularly lucky because we started looking at this trajectory very early in our research. I was very lucky with this because not only Gilberto survived, but he wrote several books after the Holocaust. And here are the examples. And he's still alive. He was still alive in January 2017. And I was privileged enough to talk to him. So he doesn't get more close readings than that. And now in his interview, so basically he talked a lot about Buchenwald. He talked about agency, the possibility of, resisting the perpetrators. He talked about social networks, family, but also a group of prisoners. He was especially close to the French prisoner there. Solidarity as key to survival, banding together in a sense. The idea of staying put, and basically when he was in the camp, once he found with his brother, which much older, a barrack that they felt comfortable with, they resisted any attempt to move them, etc. And then something that, it's very interesting and it's very common to narratives of, there is the part of heroes. He talks about a lot of heroes and very few villains. And the part I want to mention here that struck me a lot in reading these testimonies is they very rarely talk about the perpetrators. And it's interesting to notice. They don't, Gilberto told me, I don't even want to talk about those people. I'd rather talk to you about my comrades, the people with me who helped me, etc. It's very interesting. A lot of survivors have this frame of mind. Now, on the other side, a very, very distant reading. The question is, what can you learn if you have transcripts of a lot of testimonies? And here is, something called Corpus Linguistics, which is a big data technique for analyzing text. And, what can you learn from reading many thousands of testimonies? Of course, not the same kind of stuff that you can learn from Gilberto, but you can study certain, you have to, in a sense, know what you're looking for. So the number 5 is especially important in narratives of the Holocaust from Auschwitz, for example, from camps, in which we have many. Because the Nazis tend to organize, when they were doing the appeal, the roll call every morning, they organize prisoners in rows of 5, in groups of 5. So key to survival was to basically have your little band of 5 people to help you through. Gilberto has the same narrative. And so you can study these things. And so here is the testimony of a Holocaust survival. And every time that she uses the number 5. And here you can see it done with a software that does corpus linguistics in her testimonies. And here you can say with a problem that you have with scaling up. And then here is, you have some 5 in a row, 5 of us, 5 of us, 5 of us. Those refer to, the life in the camp. But then there is also 5, other number of 5 that, other is a rule 5 that does not refer to that. So this is a problem when you're studying thousands of, large groups, that you usually have problems with contextualizing the narrative. There are ways to work with that, but it's I just wanted to mention that. Now, one thing that we found very interesting in This is it's a simple word frequency list, and these are 5 women that had very long interviews and narratives that were transcribed. And one thing that is interesting here is if you look at the word list, women tend to use the pronoun we much more than more than the pronoun I. And so here are men, and perhaps not unexpectedly, men are more, me, I did this, etc., etc. So just an example, of what you can do with a distant reading and big data techniques. Now, I want to conclude briefly with some images. And here I have, I just want to give you examples of themes and things that you can find in images. Here is, something that was found on a ceiling of a barrack in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And here is basically a vignette, if you want, of life in Auschwitz left by a prisoner. Königsgraben was a canal that was dug. And here is, the prisoners working, the guards, the perpetrators. Here is a victim who died and is carried out by his friends, by other prisoners. Here is one that was done after the Holocaust, and here is a famous series of Johannes Steyer, who was a Jehovah's Witness. And he brought, he did a series of paintings, drawings after the Holocaust. And here is two examples of his work. So they're very impressionistic, if you want. Here is when he was entering, and he was reflecting about entering Auschwitz. This is Auschwitz. And you can see, it's a dead desert. The trees are cut. You're inside looking out, etc. There's no people actually. And here is what he did when, here is the end. Is when he was free, when he survived, of course. And here is, there are people. There is it's a narrative of hope. It's a representation of hope, if you want. So, and then I want to conclude with what I think. I'm a geographer. I like maps. I teach map making. Here is one of the best maps ever made, in my opinion. And it's a map. So I'll translate it for you. It says, from the old home to the new home. And here is basically this boy who was born in Berlin. And then basically that's his story. He was, it's a narrative of time and place, and it's multi-scale. This is South America, but this is his home. And and here is sequence of events. It went, and I mean, you can see it on your own, but basically he was trying. They were trying in 1938 to leave Germany, and here is where he's been until eventually he arrived in Montevideo. And that's his address here. So this map is phenomenal because it's a representation and it's multi-scale. It's about time, it's about places. It's very vivid. It's very, well, he has the little trains, the cart, the buildings, etc., etc. So I just wanted to show you this, and this is before the Holocaust. Now, the last thing I want to show you, if this is not something that I have done, of course, but I was thinking about that, how to close this presentation. And if you look at this, there are two recent Hungarian, both of them are Hungarian movies. If you haven't seen them and if you are interested in this topic, do yourself a favor and watch them. They are hard, especially Son of Soul is very, very hard. But I'm suggesting them because they are, to me, they are among the more geographical movies ever made on the Holocaust. The second, the Son of Soul in particular, is basically a view of Auschwitz from the scale of the individual. You know, this is the individual soul is the one that basically walk around and does things, etc., etc. And you can see everything from his perspective. And sorry, that's it. And I hope we have time for questions. And you know, here is that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Giordano. Yes, definitely. We have a few questions, so let me bring those up. Give me just a moment. And for those of you, I did share some information in the chat for those on Zoom, but you know, Dr. Giordano was talking about learning from Holocaust survivors, which I think is such a unique perspective and such an intimate perspective of the Holocaust. I posted in chat the recording of our closing program last year, which was presented by Holocaust survivor Evie Blakey, and that is on our YouTube channel. So the link is in chat. If you'd like to check that out, I would encourage that. Also, I was about to post in chat, so I will in just a moment. That this year for our closing program, we are hosting the son of a Holocaust survivor. It's a really interesting story. His name is Dan Ottenheimer. The son's name is Dan Ottenheimer. And so his family's story is that they were living in Germany when Hitler came to power. Dan's father, Fritz, I think was 8 when Hitler came to power. They were fortunate in that they had family in the United States that were willing to sponsor them to immigrate to the United States. However, you know, as Hitler was first coming to power, that's also when the Great Depression was starting to hit in the United States. And so when they contact their family in the US, they said, you might just want to stay where you are. Things aren't great here, that kind of thing. So it took a couple of years. And then they also, his family actually survived through Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. And that night, Dan's father, Fritz, was arrested and sent to the Dachau concentration camp. He was liberated and the family then immigrated to the US. At that point, Dan's father, Fritz, actually enlisted in the US Army and then was sent back to Germany as a US soldier. So it's a really, really interesting story. I will post the link in the chat shortly. That is on Thursday, January 27th, starting at 6:30. It will be online, so you can attend that way. I'll put the link in the chat if you'd like to register. So as far as questions, we do have some in chat here. Give me just a sec to get them pulled up. All right. Okay. I guess we don't have a ton of questions so far, but one question so far was, so we did record this session and we'll be putting the session on the library's YouTube channel. But in addition to that, Dr. Giordano, we have an attendee wondering if you might be willing to share a copy of your presentation. Totally up to you. We can talk about that later. But yeah, okay. Yes, okay, perfect. So then I will, if you just email it to me, Dr. Giordano, I will get it out to everyone that attended. And did you want to ask about the, we have a question from somebody in person. 2 questions.
First one is, Dr. Giordano, what was your dissertation on when you got your doctorate?
Were you able to hear that, Dr. Giordano?
No.
Okay, that's fine. We have a gentleman wondering what the topic of your doctoral dissertation was.
The topic of my doctoral,
Yes.
It was actually on something very different. It was about Geography of Hazards. It was a long time ago, 22 years ago, and I changed my topic, as you can tell, over time. This is not uncommon in academia, by the way. We're geographers, and we focus on different things.
Got it. Where did your interest in the Holocaust start from then? I'm curious about that.
Well, I don't know if there is anybody originally from Europe here, and grew up in Europe. But, the World War II and the Holocaust is really something that is still very present in Europe. We talked about it, you have to study at school now, etc. I've always been interested in the Holocaust. I've always been interested in history, in historical. And so I don't have a family connection, if that is the one of the questions. I had, relatives that ended up actually in Auschwitz, but not as Jewish people, as prisoners of war. And if you were a prisoner of war, you had a relatively speaking better experience than if you had. And actually, Gilberto Salmoni ended up in Buchenwald because when they were classified by the Nazis, after they were captured, for a series of reasons that are long reasons, he and his brother were not classified as Jews, were classified as half Jews. And so they were sent to a relatively better camp. So.
Gotcha. Wonderful. Okay. And then what was your other question, sir?
So when you said in this presentation, Mussolini's fascist government was also involved in the Holocaust, it wasn't just Hitler's Nazi program.
Got it. So just wanted a confirmation that just more information about Mussolini's involvement in the Holocaust and how that was all connected.
So in Italy, the fascist regime, there's been different takes on this, but basically, just to be brief, it looks like there were some anti-Semitic, really anti-Semitic personalities in the fascist regime, but it looks like it was more for Mussolini and opportunistic. The Italians have never really been anti-Semitic, and the fascist regime was not. And in fact, at the beginning of the regime, for several years, there were Jewish men who were part of the upper echelons of the fascist government. Now, they were, they started, implementing legislation, anti-Jewish legislation, relatively late in 1938. And it was more like an opportunist. Hitler really wanted them to do it, just, to put it very bluntly. And it was only after the fall. But Mussolini and the fascist regime always resisted the Nazis' request to deport Jews before in 1941, 42, 43, until they fell, until the fascist regime fell and the Nazi took over. And the Nazi took over most of Italy, and then there was a puppet regime by the Nazis, if you want, that also did it. But it was, I would say at the end of the day, it was more like opportunistic. It was good for the war, basically, but it was half-hearted, if you want.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that answer. So taking some questions from folks on Zoom, have someone wondering about those two Hungarian films that you mentioned. Do you know offhand if those have English subtitles or the way to add English subtitles?
Are you talking about the movies?
Yeah, the movies that you mentioned towards the end of your presentation.
The movies are
English subtitles.
The movies are wonderful. I am not one who shows movies very often when I teach, but I always show them in graduate courses. especially some of so they are in Hungarian, but they have subtitles. I don't speak it, Hungarian.
Great.
So do take, really. I'm not making any money out of this, but if you want, they're really good movies. They're very different, but they're both good, and they tell you a lot about. So 1945 is about two Jewish men going back to their village. And basically, well, you'll see if you watch it. And
Gotcha.
and they were very, very common narratives of the Holocaust. Even Gilberto Salmoni, when he went back to Genoa, he found a woman that had taken his apartment. They kicked her out immediately, but the 1945 is a little bit, it's a common story.
Gotcha. All right, wonderful. So we're getting close to 3 o'clock. So if anyone needed to hop off right at 3 o'clock, you are welcome to do that. I'll try to take maybe 2 or 3 more questions from Zoom here. Give me just a moment. So talking a little bit more about your interest in, this specific research. What inspired your research into the connection between geography and genocide?
The connection, well, I try to make the point that, if you basically, I would say, and it's a very general statement, that genocide, when it's implemented by the state, as it was by the Nazis, it is implemented differently in different places at different times. So if you look at the places, like I tried to show you with Italy and Budapest, there are different strategies that have been implemented. So in Western Europe, for example, there were no ghettos. They were not practical. The population would not have gone for that, etc. So if you look at the Holocaust from a geographical perspective, you actually learn about how it was implemented differently. And from the point of view of the survivors, you can actually see, how being in different places created a different narrative, different stories. One thing that I have not mentioned, but one thing that is incredibly, so if you know the history of Eastern Europe, especially, there were, thousands. I have a project in Lithuania, and in Lithuania, there were hundreds of what they're called shtetls, little Jewish villages. And if you have seen, what was the movie, very famous movie, 1970 movie, Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh, okay. Yep.
They have all disappeared. And so Lithuania and all of those Eastern, Poland, it's not the same country as it was before. So there is also that social urban geography, political geography that has changed. And so that's what, I think it's very, very promising. If I may say one thing, I read a question here, somebody is asking about Rwanda and Sudan. And I actually had a student working in Canada that I was helping, working on the geography of the Rwanda genocide. Now, one thing that is interesting here, and the Rwanda genocide was so quick, and it's still mostly undocumented, that in order to apply a lot of these techniques, you have to have good data. You have to have data, like the one I had, like a list of people or primary sources. And, the Germans tried to erase a lot of records, but no, they were not able to erase all of the records that they kept, and they kept very good records. And so you have to have the data if you want to do the kind of analysis that I showed you today, which is quite detailed.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, thank you for grabbing that question. And just our last question on Zoom, and then I'll double check with our folks here in person. But So just final question from Zoom. What are some areas of scholarship and exploration in Holocaust geographies that appear promising, but haven't yet been deeply examined?
So that is actually a fascinating question. And if I can give it to you, my perspective, from 2007 to 2015, our group basically looked very much at the mapping, the quantitative analysis, the perspective or the perpetrator, the calculation of distances, the modeling of behavior in the Budapest ghetto, etc. And that is a very perpetrator. So you basically work with perpetrator records, and it's very abstract, it's very quantitative. You measure distances, you measure concentration of people and events and things. Now, in the last several years, I have personally left a little bit that I'm convinced that you need both to study genocide, but much more interesting in the survivors' narratives. And so things like, Gilberto talking, about his constant strategies that he implemented at that time through his family of, when they were in Genoa, they were staying put. Then when it was time to leave, they tried to leave very quickly. So if you look at the testimonies of the survivor from a point of view of the geography, it's an alternate staying put, fleeing, staying put, fleeing. So that's very interesting. One other thing that it's interesting is when the survivor talk about they were hiding, where they were hiding, what was, the relationship with the people who were hiding them, where, who did they band with? That's another thing that it's, of course, you need a more qualitative approach rather than quantitative. And the last thing that it's interesting is from this point of view, let me see if I remember, I lost my train of thought there for a moment, but it's the social networks. And, if you read, this is a little bit more perhaps technical and academic, but if you look at the narratives of the survivors from a chronological point of view, what they did, when they did it, it is, in addition to what I've already said, is basically is the spatialization, the geographicalization, if you want, of social networks. You move your social networks through place, through your different stages of the Holocaust. And so it's interesting from this point of view. What it's interesting is to look at how the relationship between social networks. I'm doing a project now on families and how families went through the Holocaust together. It's interesting. So it's that interrelation between place, if you want, and social networks. And it's the idea of sense of place. How do you feel about being in a place you are? Are you comfortable? Of course, these are extreme cases. I mean, we're talking about the Holocaust here, not about, I live in Austin and I like it. So, but that's what.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Giordano. I think those are all of our questions. So thank you so much, Dr. Giordano, for presenting today. I know we've had a lot of positive feedback in the chat, so thank you. Just one, as we wrap up here, just want to share one thing real quick. Give me just a moment. Assuming technology will cooperate with me. Okay, current slide. There we go. All right, so as I mentioned at the beginning, today's presentation is the first program in this year's Holocaust Learn and Remember program. We have programs throughout this month. I want to say we have like 12 or 13 programs, maybe total. I've lost track of the total number. So, most of those, I think for all of them, there is an option to attend virtually. And we are also offering the option to attend in person. Sometimes it's a quote unquote hybrid like this. Sometimes we're offering, some sessions that are just in person and some sessions that are just online, that kind of thing. So if you want information about the programs that we're offering, if you go to the library's webpage and then you click on right on our banner, this link may not be correct. This is not looking right to me. If you click on the banner that's on the library's website, the Holocaust Learn and Remember banner, it will take you to the page on our website that has the full information about Holocaust Learn and Remember this year. It lists all of the program dates and times, and if it's in person or it's virtual or it's both. We are also hosting an exhibit this year and this year, usually our Holocaust Learn and Remember exhibit is at Central Library, but because of the construction this year, the exhibit this year is at Westfall Branch Library, which is the northwest part of town. It's off of I-10, 410 and Vance Jackson. The exhibit is about displaced persons camps. So it's 20 panels that talks about the experiences of folks that lived in displaced persons camps during the time of the Holocaust. So, and that is available anytime the library is open, which is Mondays and Tuesdays from noon to 8 p.m. And then all the other days of the week, Wednesday through Sunday from 10 to 6 p.m. So please go to Westfall Branch Library and check that out. Otherwise, visit that LibGuide to get all of the information. I did put the link in the chat for the closing program, so you can register for that. And then also just wanted to mention the two movies that Dr. Giordano mentioned. Once he sends me the presentation, I will look to see if the library owns those. If we don't, I will work on see what we can do to order them. If we own them, I will put that in the email when I send out Dr. Giordano's presentation, which will be sometime this week. And then, like I said, we will post this recording to the library's YouTube channel. That should be within the next couple weeks or so. So you can keep an eye out for that. So again, thank you all of you that attended either on Zoom or in person. Thank you so much, Dr. Giordano. Thank you to the Holocaust Memorial Museum of San Antonio, who we partner with. Did you have one more thing, Dr. Giordano?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm going to have two other presentations next week, very, very similar. And please do reach out if you have questions. I'm happy to chat with anybody who's interested in these. If you just go to my university website, you'll find me. Okay.
Great. And yes, Dr. Giordano is presenting the same presentation next Sunday. It'll be 2 times. I think it's noon and 2, right, Dr. Giordano? I can't remember. The information is on the LibGuide on the website. So if you want to tell friends or family or neighbors that missed today and they want to attend in person, those are only going to be online. But yeah, you can register on the website and then folks can attend that one online. So again, thank you so much for your time and everyone have a great day.
Thank you.